Welcome back to Left, Labor Education for Today. This is the weekly rundown where we talk about the top stories from the world of work this past week. And in our first story, the Screen Actors Guild has reached a tentative agreement with the Association of Motion Picture and Television Producers. Although the deal has yet to be fully ratified, workers can return to work right away as the picket lines were officially suspended as of November 9th. This brought to an end a 118-day work stoppage, the longest in the 90-year history of the Screen Actors Guild. The tentative agreement brings an array of improvements to covered workers, including higher pay minimums, better healthcare funding, and protections around artificial intelligence and self-taped auditions, among a series of additional contractual enhancements.
We broke a lot of new ground and things that were never in the contract before are now in the contract.
At the end of the day, the union didn't get everything that it wanted. For example, they were requesting an 11% wage increase in the first year, but settled for 7%. They also were demanding a percentage of streaming service revenue, but landed on a more narrowly tailored bonus plan that would be based on performance metrics for streaming shows going forward. I think the more interesting question is, where do we go from here? Just like the lucrative contracts that were garnered at UPS and at the Detroit auto manufacturers, the studios are now also going to be looking for ways to offset costs, and that could come in the form of a reduced pace of hiring or staffing, increased layoffs, or simply the leverage of artificial intelligence to improve that bottom line performance. And in our second story, a few updates from the UAW front. Although contract negotiations have come to an end, the ratification process is very much underway. This week, we saw 4,700 workers at a GM plant in Flint, Michigan, vote against ratification by a narrow margin. And I think this is just a speed bump in what will otherwise be a successful ratification process, but it was a very much unexpected hiccup in the ratification process. Meanwhile, developments for non-union companies continue to take shape. Honda followed suit from Toyota last week, announcing an 11% wage increase for its non-union U.S. factory workers. Workers at Tesla's Fremont, California facility officially formed a bargaining committee, and that bargaining committee is going to be directly funded by the United Auto Workers. Lastly, an internal memo at Subaru suggests that the non-union car manufacturer has gotten a lot of feedback from employees about the company's response to UAW negotiations, with the company sharing that it does plan to respond with a pre-holiday announcement coming soon. All this is being underpinned by continued public relations support by President Biden for both non-union and unionized auto workers.
There have been thousands of auto workers since the contract was announced, non-union auto workers who have said they want to join the UAW. What's your message to those workers and to the companies that they work at, many of which we know have had a history of violating employees' right to unionize?
Join, organize, picket, protest. You have a right to, under American law, you have a right to form a union, and you cannot be stopped. You cannot be intimidated.
Next, hospitality workers on the Las Vegas Strip have reached tentative agreements with Caesars, MGM, and Wynn just ahead of the anticipated strike deadline on November 10th. These 35,000 servers, bartenders, cooks, and housekeepers, as represented by the Culinary Workers Local 226 and the Bartenders Union Local 165, have been negotiating against these companies for about 7 months over key workplace issues such as wages, health and safety, recall rights, and daily mandatory room cleanings. Ted Papageorge, the Secretary-Treasurer of Culinary Workers Local 226, compared it to landing 3 large planes at once, very similar to what Sean Fain had been doing as the president of UAW negotiating against the Detroit 3 auto manufacturers. While the exact details have yet to be made public, Papageorge does say that union members will go from $26 an hour to $35 an hour by the end of this 5-year contract. The contract also brought about the return of that daily mandatory room cleaning, which had been a requirement during the pandemic, but had since been phased back out. This was an important consideration, an important contract proposal for housekeepers who were relying on this daily mandatory room cleaning to maintain their hours and their job security. Meanwhile, President Biden also weighed in on this collective bargaining breakthrough for the Las Vegas hospitality workers saying in a statement on Friday that Las Vegas has a long union history and workers have been critical to the city's growth and success. All workers, including hospitality workers, should have good jobs with fair pay and benefits that give them the opportunity to provide for themselves and their families. And in our next story, this week, Starbucks announced some improvements to wages and benefits following the conclusion of its 2023 fiscal year. However, at the same time, Starbucks says that these enhancements will only apply to partners at its non-union stores. Starbucks has repeatedly taken the position that it does not have the unilateral authority to change terms and conditions of employment for partners at its stores that have chosen to pursue more formal organizing. In the past, Starbucks Workers United has filed unfair labor practice charges against the company anytime Starbucks would fail to apply its wage and benefit enhancements to unionized stores. And one such charge was recently adjudicated in favor of the union, with a National Labor Relations Board administrative law judge ruling that Starbucks unlawfully withheld benefits and wage increases from its unionized stores. Starbucks, however, is in the process of appealing that ruling, citing that no company has ever been allowed to unilaterally implement wage and benefit changes, even those objectively in favor of the employees, that those changes need to be negotiated with the union before they can be implemented at those locations. Starbucks Workers United says that it does plan to file unfair labor practice charges against the company in light of these recent enhancements. The union has also been marketing this year's Red Cup Rebellion, whereby some Starbucks employees plan to go on strike at the onset of the Starbucks holiday season in protest of unfair working conditions and alleged union busting activities. And just a couple more stories to round out this week's video. In sports, Andre Iguodala, former basketball player with the Philadelphia 76ers and the Golden State Warriors, was announced as the interim executive director for the NBA Players Union this week. Iguodala replaces Tamika Tremaglio, who left her position less than halfway through a 4-year term to pursue other opportunities. Iguodala had been active in collective bargaining negotiations in the contract that just recently took effect, affecting NBA players. That contract is not expected to be renewed again until, at the earliest, 2028. And lastly, a quick update on a story I mentioned last week involving 3,700 striking public school employees in the Portland, Oregon area. These employees continued to be on strike this week, affecting 45,000 students across 81 schools in the area. Negotiations did continue between the parties this week. However, they were interrupted by an alleged unfair labor practice by the Portland Association of Teachers. Basically, the Portland School Board says that the teachers were engaging in picketing and demonstrations at the homes and businesses of school board members. This would be potentially unlawful under the National Labor Relations Act. Of course, the teachers are denying the allegations. They're saying that they're engaging in peaceful protests, which is protected by law, protected under the Constitution, and that they're not picketing or engaging in protests at anybody's place of business or anybody's home. Regardless, it sounds like these sorts of activities are not helping the parties get on the same page to be able to bring all administrators, teachers, and students back to the classroom. We'll have to wait and see if any progress can be made over the coming days and weeks. And that'll do it for this week's edition of the Weekly Rundown. I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you learned something, and I hope to see you again in next week's video. Thanks, and take care.